Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is finally time for my review of the 4th studio album from the Compton rapper Kendrick Lamar. This one is called Damn. No introduction needed. If you don't listen to Kendrick Lamar, you are missing out on what is arguably some of the best music that the 21st century has had to offer. With Kendrick, over the span of just a few years, releasing 2 of my all-time favorite hip-hop albums, containing some of the deepest themes, the most socially conscious lyrics, and the most creative productions I've ever seen in hip-hop music, Kendrick Lamar is just straight up a legend. To say that he's one of my favorite rappers would be a complete understatement, because honestly, Kendrick Lamar is just one of my favorite artists even outside the realm of hip-hop. Part of the reason that I don't cover a lot of rap music on my channel is because, much like EDM, I feel like the rap game has become pretty saturated. Kendrick Lamar, though, is one of those rappers that actually transcends past just being your standard hip-hop artist and has a much wider appeal because his music is so insanely creative. With him showing us in 2016 that even his throwaways are gold on the album Untitled Unmastered, Damn was easily one of the most anticipated albums of the year, and for the most part, I think Kendrick Lamar lives up to that hype. Now, let me preface this review by saying that following up to his last 2 albums, Good Kid, Mad City, and To Pimp a Butterfly, was not going to be an easy task at all for Kendrick. With Good Kid, Mad City being one of the most eye-opening albums of our generation, talking about Kendrick's life growing up in Compton. Like I already mentioned, already one of my all-time favorite hip-hop albums, and then Kendrick Lamar comes along in 2015 and absolutely blows that one out of the water with To Pimp a Butterfly, his most artistic album to date. Taking some great conceptual approaches, not only in the lyrics of this album, but in its instrumentation as well, taking some serious influence from jazz music. Now, making an album more creative than To Pimp a Butterfly would have been essentially an impossible task, so you know, Kendrick Lamar did the smartest thing he possibly could with Damn, and that was make a very commercial-sounding album. And I kind of figured this out within the frame of the releases of the promotional single The Heart Part 4, and then of course the follow-up, the song Humble, the first single from this album. When Humble dropped, I knew for myself 100% that The Heart Part 4 was meant to be a transitional piece between To Pimp a Butterfly and Damn, with the first part of the song being very off-kilter. In fact, I think it would have fit very snug into the track list of To Pimp a Butterfly, and then the second half of the song being kind of centered toward being a diss track, kind of with a much more standard hip-hop beat on production behind it. And then of course when Humble came out, carrying a lot of those same lyric themes, I knew that Damn was essentially going to be an album of bangers. And you know, this album does its job. But let me just say this straight up, I don't like this album as much as Kendrick Lamar's last 2, and that definitely doesn't diminish this album as a bad album. In fact, I think this is a very great album, one of the best that 2017 has had to offer so far, but partially it being my fault, the way that I listen to music. I really want things to be super conceptual, I want everything to really tie together, and this album doesn't do that as well as his last 2. With Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick Lamar makes figuring out these concepts very easy on listeners by kind of painting everything out. With this album, it's not so simple. You kind of have to dig deeper into the tracks individually, because the album overall doesn't have kind of a standard theme to it, except with maybe a couple different locations. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that the biggest themes that this album carries are very visual and very surface level. You look at the names of these tracks and they're all very short, one-word, simple phrases in all caps with a period at the end. And then you've got the album art, which has the very bold red Damn written at the top, and then you've got Kendrick Lamar, who's looking very intensely into the camera, almost like he's possessed or something. I think it's very straightforward. Kendrick humbled himself a lot on his last cut, To Pimp a Butterfly, but with this album, Kendrick is calling shots and taking names, calling out everyone from Fox News to Big Sean. I think the main takeaway, though, when it comes to callouts on this album is definitely Fox News. He calls them out on a few different tracks on this album and even samples them on the first couple tracks. And the Fox News anchors do a great job of speaking their mind, not really thinking things through, misinterpreting things, misinterpreting African-American culture and Black Lives Matter. So good on Kendrick Lamar for finally calling them out. This is actually, I think, the first time I've ever seen them called out on an album this heavily for their wrongdoings. It isn't just Fox News, though, that Kendrick Lamar seems to be calling out on this album. In fact, there are a number of spots where he seems to be kind of imitating and possibly mocking or making fun of other different rappers in the industry on these songs. I thought Kendrick Lamar kind of imitated the flow of Frank Ocean on the song Ya, Kanye West on the song Element, Travis Scott on the song Loyalty, which I actually thought was one of the most clear parallels that he gives, especially because, for one, DJ Dahi seems to be kind of imitating Travis Scott very heavily on it, and then, of course, the line, "Ooh, that pussy good, it's to die for," seems to be a callback to Kendrick Lamar's recent collaboration with Travis Scott, Goosebumps. And of course, Kendrick Lamar raps over a Drake kind of beat on the song Love. And of course, I don't necessarily think that Kendrick Lamar is calling out each and every one of these rappers within these songs, but more rather taking each of these rappers' signature sounds and kind of cementing himself as number one by doing a better job at it than they would. Other than that, this album doesn't really have a heavy theme to it, which serves to make it a lot less cohesive. Rather, these individual songs, these names of these songs on this album kind of give listeners a preview as to what's going to come into the context of the songs, but only in some cases on the album. In fact, in a number of other cases, you kind of see the names of these songs and expect the opposite. Like, for example, the song Triple X isn't about sex, the song God isn't about God, but rather kind of Kendrick Lamar portraying himself as a god. The song Duckworth isn't about Kendrick Lamar, but rather his father. More so than his father Ducky, this song is about Top Dawg, who originally signed Kendrick Lamar to begin with, and who is actually the producer behind a number of songs on this album. This track kind of portrays a story about how Top Dawg almost killed Kendrick's dad. And just a side note, I absolutely love when albums do this kind of thing. It was one of the big things that I loved about Lito's Everything album, which of course was my number one pick, my number one album of 2016. When an artist takes a person that inspired some or all of the lyrics behind an album and then actually physically features them on the album, that is just really huge to me. One of the coolest things you can do in music. Aside from those, there are a couple other small themes that appear a few different times on this album, like family, of course. That's not a super new theme. We saw a lot of that, especially involved in Good Kid, Mad City. Prayer, that theme is fairly prevalent on the majority of this album, with Kendrick Lamar saying, "Ain't nobody praying for me, nobody pray for me." And then of course we've got Kendrick Lamar kind of drawing parallels between himself and Jesus Christ, which comes up a number of times in the Humble music video, and then of course we also see it on the song DNA, where he pulls out the Immaculate Conception line. I thought the feature choices as well on this album were fairly interesting, although it kind of mirrors the fact that this album was going to be more commercial anyway, featuring U2 and Rihanna. The U2 track actually coming to surprise me as one of the most experimental tracks on this album, and easily one of my favorites that it had to offer. Some other potentially interesting things, I think Kendrick Lamar got a number of very surprising producers to feature on this album, like James Blake, who I never expected to see his name next to Kendrick Lamar's on this one. He was the co-producer on Element, as well as Bad Bad Not Good, who helped out with the song Lust. But probably the producing feature that impressed me the most out of all of the productions on this album is on the final track, Duckworth. The producer Ninth Wonder did this one, and man, I'm probably going to be following Ninth Wonder as a fan just after checking out this song, because man, those chops are absolutely insane. Ninth Wonder has been producing music since the early 2000s, but I think he has a very unique way of kind of looking at the past in music and kind of translating that, kind of taking it and reinventing it in a new way, which I just absolutely love. I will definitely be checking out more of his stuff in the future. Honestly, every critic and every listener of this album is going to interpret the lyrics in their own unique way. I would suggest, if you want to get a more in-depth analysis of the lyrics of this thing, go check out Genius.com. They have some insane lyric interpretations. That's where I get a lot of my information from when it comes to albums, but I tended to try to stay away from the interpretations of this album in particular, because I didn't really want to have a biased point of view, but there were a couple things that I thought were potentially interesting or different than what other interpreters have had to say about this album. One of those being the blind woman that's talked about in the first track on this album, Blood, that Kendrick Lamar goes out and tries to help, and then she of course kills him. I think especially evidenced by the fact that Fox News is first reference on this track on the album. I think the blind woman is kind of supposed to represent Fox News and various other kinds of critics of Kendrick's music. You know, because these critics almost seem to be blind to the message that Kendrick Lamar is trying to push across, and then of course they're kind of killing him by dismissing him altogether as just another rapper. And then on the song Element, my personal interpretation of it is that Kendrick Lamar is kind of making fun of this glamorous lifestyle that a lot of different rappers live in. I mainly think he's calling out Drake on this song, personally. And that's really about it when it comes to this album. Like I've mentioned a million times before, rap music isn't really my forte, so it's kind of hard to get in and dissect it. There are probably 1,000 other critics who did a much more detailed analysis of this album than I could, so I'm glad that you as a viewer decided to stay around and watch me kind of bullcrap my way through this, because I'm just not good with rap music at all. But I love Kendrick Lamar. If you haven't listened to him before, I would definitely suggest going and checking out his stuff. Probably start from the beginning to the end, kind of see his whole story all the way from Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City to Pimp a Butterfly, even probably Untitled Unmastered you might want to listen to as kind of a B-side of To Pimp a Butterfly, and then check out this album because all of them are just so good. Kendrick Lamar, like I said, favorite rapper in the game. This album, I'm probably feeling a strong 8.5, maybe a light 9, but probably more likely a strong 8.5. Like I said, check out this album if you haven't. I have that Spotify link down in the description below, and if you guys have listened to this album, and if you've been loving this album, or for some reason hating this album, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll see you later. Peace.